Hello, my name is Randy Hightower, and I'm a junior at Northside High School.
Hello, I am Ariana Wells, and I am also a junior at Northside High School.
Hi, my name is Mira Corinfra, and I'm also a junior at Northside High School.
Hi, I'm Zaya Williams, and I'm also a junior at Northside High School.
And today we'll be discussing the book, What Caused the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, reading selected and introduced by David J. Weber.
I'll be reading pages 3 through 34.
I'll be reading pages 35 through 66.
I'll be reading pages 67 through 97.
I'll be reading pages 98 through 125.
We are in your U.S. History dual credit college class through HTC.
In my section of the book, it stated that the Pueblo Indians overthrew the Spaniards, meaning the Spaniards lost at war and were taken over by the Pueblo Indians. The Spaniards first came to New Mexico in 1540 to find treasure, led by Francisco Vázquez de Caldenaro, looking for the 7 cities of gold. Questions was raised as to why did the Spaniards take so long to rebel. I think they waited so long to rebel because they had no other option to. In 1598, Juan de Ante went without the king's permission to plant a priority colony on the Rio Grande. What I got from this reading was that the Spaniards were willing to do anything to get to the treasure. In 1958, Juan de Ante started to bring his people into the Pueblos community. He made the Pueblos think that building them churches for worship and places to live in their territories was a good idea. This also proves that the Spaniards were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. But then that raised questions as to how could the Pueblos forget the burning of the Pueblo of Acoma when it offered resistance in 1598. The punishment met out to the survivors by the Spaniards with sword steels. The Spaniards' rewarded and punishment was to cut off the right foot of any Acoman male 25 and older. I agree with the Pueblos because who wants to get their right foot cut off? The Spaniards threatened them and offered all types of harsh punishments, so they really had no other choice but to do what the Spaniards said.
In my section of the book, it had been discussed by Ramon Gutierrez, who said, in contrast, the Franciscans are portrayed as the skillful manipulators of Indians who believed the priests understood in general, if not in particular, and that the Francians insinuated themselves into the Pueblo life by consciously and unconsciously assuming the roles of Pueblo leaders and chiefs, convincing others to collaborate with them. Ramon Gutierrez also indulges in how it is a disillusion overcame the Franciscans when their success began to sour, and as early as the 1640s when they began to lose authority. My questions for a closer reading. Why did some Franciscans welcome martyrdom? They had welcomed martyrdom and frequently fantasized about their impending death because, as other friars, they were anxious to suffer martyrdom for God and not turn their back on hazards or endangering their lives for the salvation of souls. Number 2, why does he see the Franciscans welcoming it as an act of aggression against the Pueblos? He can see it as an act of aggression towards the Pueblos, or as a supreme aggression because the Indians were provoked to murder only when they were pushed beyond their limit of humanly possible. And each time the Spanish soldiers always retaliated with brute force whenever the Indians killed their friars, yet for the friars, the mission to be a martyr has been accomplished. Number 3, how is it demonstrated that some Pueblo leaders resisted before the 1670s? It is demonstrated that they had resisted in the 1670s when the famine had overtaken in 1670 and a decade of death followed. The Indian population had dramatically decreased due to the famine, and in 1670, hordes of hungry Apaches and Navajos began attacking the kingdom's settlements by killing and stealing and carrying off with whatever they had found. Number 4. When the crisis of the 1670s led Pueblos to practice their religion openly, how did the Spaniards treat them? The Spaniards had treated them even worse, especially to medicine men who admitted to practicing witchcraft, as they were arrested, flogged, and sold off to slavery. Number 5. What religious promises did Pope make to his followers? He had promised to the disaffected, displaced, and hungry that their ancient gods would only return bearing gifts of happiness and prosperity only when the Christians and their God were dead. He had also promised that whoever killed a Spaniard will get an Indian woman for a wife, and whoever kills four will get 4 women, and whoever kills 10 or more will have a like number of women. Number 6. What tactics did Pueblos employ to defeat the better armed Spaniards? The Puebloans had a higher ratio of people, which was approximately 1 to 50. They had also stole or killed the horses and mules that had been introduced to the Indian populations and that had been used by the Spaniards.
Okay, so in my reading of the book, I read pages 66 through 97, and I found that Chavez believed that Pueblos were peaceful people, the Apaches were warlike people, and the Dominican Naranjo were more active and restless by nature than the Startled Indians. He said they worshiped no god, but rather a power. Then he believed that mixed bloods were more effective leaders because they were tall black men with yellow eyes, and that they were descendants of black men who understood how much the Pueblo and Spanish people went through and their ways, so they knew what to do in need of war than what the Pueblos thought they knew. I agree with Chavez because if I was to see these big, tall, muscular black men, I would believe they would be better leaders instead of those scrawny Indians as Chavez described them. Then they were taken on an adventure by Chavez where he told us about the religion of the Pueblos, and I believe he told us about it because that is one of the main parts of why the Indians were killed. They were slaughtered all because of the religion, which I feel like that is downright horrible, because just because someone doesn't believe in what you believe in is basically just a mass genocide of different people because you don't believe in what they believe in. So why does it matter if they don't believe in what you believe in? It's a free world, and they try to do whatever they want to.
In my section of the reading, pages 98 to 125, it was really about trying to figure out who was the middleman in the situation and trying to figure out who was the person stuck in between and trying to figure out if it was the same man or 2 different men who were really allies and kind of like a runner between the 2 different parties, and trying to figure out who was the main cause of the Pueblo Revolt. Also, there's a section in my reading about Andrew Knott, I believe his name is, about his version of what the story behind this is. And his was that the Pueblos and the Spaniards, they didn't unite or they didn't separate from each other, but they all had their own problems. Pueblos fought with Pueblos, Spaniards fought with Spaniards, but the Spaniards made it easy for the Pueblos to revolt because of what they did. And so it kind of gave the Pueblos time to sit there and kind of react to it and be like, okay, this is how we're going to overthrow this, if that makes sense. And so his version of the story is that the Pueblos, they had their time to sit there and react to it and take like a while before they could actually just revolt over it, and that it took a lot of planning and stuff. But the Spaniards nor the Pueblos were blameless. They both had their fault, but it's more so the Spaniards' fault because their actions caused the Pueblos to revolt worse than it would have been. Also, it mentioned the witnesses who were brought into account, and it was generations of Jose's family, and each of the generations, it went up to the 5th generation. The 4th generation, they claimed that there was no known information that could be given because their father didn't say anything. The 5th generation were caught to testify or witness, and they had even less information, which caused it to be in the air, so it's not really a known factor.
My point was that the Pueblo Indians had no choice but to listen to the Spaniards because of all their harsh punishment and cruelties.
Well, Randy, I disagree with you because I feel like the reason they are harsh punishment because they live in a life of fear, so they feel like they're obligated to go against them. It wasn't like, oh, well, I'm not going to go fight you just because I'm going to fight you. It's like they were living in constant fear, trying to just go on what they're saying in life, and they weren't. So they had to revolt against the Spaniards, so they have peace inside of them.
I never thought about it that way.
In my section, my argument was that I did think that some Franciscans invited martyrdom because they were anxious to suffer for God and not turn their back on hazards or endangering their lives for the salvation of souls. And involving that they welcomed the martyrdom, it had also been as an act of, as Gutierrez had said, supreme aggression, because the Indians were provoked to murder, and only when they were pushed beyond their humanly possible limits. And once they were pushed...
Okay, wait. But this is the thing, though. You don't have to just sacrifice yourself, for God or whatever, and you said Satanism, but why would you go into a battle just to get killed, just to become a saint? That's not how life should be. You should die for something. Okay, I can understand, like, religion and everything, but no, don't just, like, okay, I'm going to go do this, I'm going into this battle just so that I can die. Because that's not the way that you should be doing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then a recap of mine is that Chavez thought that these big black men were just more effective leaders than these scrawny Indians, because when you see someone strong and see someone back and strong, you just feel like, oh wow, like intimidated. And so like I feel like that's why he felt like they were good people to look after, other than those Indians who aren't.
I agree with Miracle because in today's society, black men are seen as powerful leaders, and if that's how it was seen back in the 1600s, then that's how it should be.
My point that I expressed was Andrew Knott's idea of it, that Pueblos and Spanish, they both had equal blame. The Spaniards had more blame in a way, but neither of them were blameless with the situation that happened.
Yes, and I'll agree with Zaya because they each have their fair share of blame. They each have their fair share of areas surrounding how they each, like, if one provoked one, then they would retaliate. And I agree with her because, sorry.
Well, they all, okay, but they all have their blame, and because the situation is that they all fought at one point. Pueblos with each other, Spaniards with each other, but it was like they didn't come together and they didn't separate, but they provoked each other in a way.
Yeah.
So they both have that blame on them. So it's not one person's fault or the other. I think it's
Yeah, like they both have their equal share fair blame, but it was more of an advantage to the Spaniards because they had more technology, more armor, everything. They had like anything that they could use that the Pueblos couldn't use. So they were definitely at an advantage in those terms of them being like more technology advanced.
So then we all came as a group and we talked about if we thought the religion was one part, the whole part that was being slaughtered, or just the whole reason, or just one part. And we all agreed that it was
Just a little part. Religion had been just a little part of the whole ordeal, because of the religion, they had led to beatings, arrestings, slaughters, and everything like that. So
it wasn't just this. It wasn't the whole reason for it, because there were other. I don't know what the word is for it. Other reasons and stuff like that. For religion, just happened to be one that was more known about it.
Yeah, more prominent.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was a prominent one.
So that was our understanding and takes from the book, basically.
That was our opinions and what we found out from the book.
From What Caused the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, reading selected and introduced by David J. Weber.
Thank you.
Thank you.